Hello everybody and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's Wednesday the 6th of April, it's 5:30. Let's make a start. Firstly, we have no apologies this evening. Are there any declarations of interest not already recorded on your register of interests? No. Excellent. Agenda item 2 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March, which are in your agenda, pages 3 through 6. Any comments? No, happy for me to sign those, which I shall do shortly. Agenda item 3 is public participation. And we have our good friend, Mr. Andy Mendes, as our only speaker this evening. Andy, you wish to speak to us on various agenda items for this evening? Yes, time it. Ready whenever you are.
Yeah, you know roughly what I'm going to say, Michael. I hope it has changed a bit. And Gwen said she'd lend me a minute if I overran because she's not speaking.
Oh, well, I'm not going to hold you to the second.
I'll be as quick as I can. Hello, everybody, again. Three or four things I want to talk about. Three very briefly. One on the Mazars report. I'd be interested to understand how Mazars will monitor progress against the recent PIR, and particularly how they will report their conclusions to Audit and Governance. On PIR progress, I note that Veritas have been asked to review all exit packages every 6 months, starting from the 31st of August 2021. I don't see any mention in the latest Veritas report. Can the monitoring officer or Max just tell us if this is happening, please? I'll leave others to comment on the cost of PIR report. I'm sure you will. On the internal audit, my favourite topics generally. On the fraud report, Veritas have seemed to be quite successful in identifying fraud across a range of areas this time. As described, some of these are clearly not mistakes, but serious attempts to steal money from CYC. Unless I misread the report, the strongest response has been a formal warning. Who decides on the actions to be taken when fraud is identified, and at what point is a prosecution initiated? Have there been any prosecutions so far this year, and is this a typical year? And then on to the guts of it for me on the internal audit reports themselves. Two I'd like to comment on. First, on the FMS report. The report says a review has been undertaken by the ICT team manager, and it has concluded that all users should continue to have full access to the FMS for maintenance support purposes. I assume full access includes not only visibility, but the ability to update and delete records in a key financial system. I'm amazed that 16 members of any ICT team would be sufficiently well trained in any single system. How many people are there in the ICT team anyway? Is it 16? I don't think this should go unchallenged. I can't see any justification for this response from the ICT manager. And then my final point and my main point on the ordering and creditor payment system, which is a tangled web in my view. Looking back, the previous audit was given substantial assurance in June 2019. It was published then, although I read in this report that it wasn't finalized, apparently. I don't understand that. This followed one reported in 2017, where a P3 finding was made relating to invoices without purchase orders, with a response to review and investigate. Clearly, despite the substantial assurance then, it was felt that another audit was necessary. So the November 2020 update told us that planning had commenced. Fieldwork lasted more than a year, and I know COVID was in there. The report wasn't published until today. And for me, there are lots of worrying details in the reports, but it seems the key headlines are that while completion of purchase orders is a key part of the Council's financial regulations, and since December 2012, the Council has had a no purchase order, no payment system, entirely sensible in my view, in my experience. In fact, in 2015-16, the proportion of invoices which predated purchase orders was less than 20%, still quite a lot, but there's explanations for that, I'm sure Debbie will tell you. In 2019, it was 31%. Today, in this report, it was shown as 44%. So it's nearly half invoices received before the purchase order was approved. And the idea that 44% of expenditure commitments are made before the purchase order approval seems to me to be both dangerous and scandalous. Now, Debbie tells me she's not worried, but I would suggest that the Audit and Governance Committee should be. So it's 3 audits in 5 years in a key financial system, and there seem to me to be still to be serious failings here. And I'd suggest that all 5 of the main findings in this report are significant. Together, they seem to me to represent a broken system. Please, Audit and Governance, don't let this go. Set some rapid follow-up targets and seek reassurance that improvements have really been achieved this time, other than in the last few times. And that's me done. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And I see copious notes have been taken, so I'm sure that Max will be able to respond to some of those when we get to that agenda item. Thank you very much. So, agenda item 4 are the key corporate risks monitor 4, and we've got a new colleague joining us this evening. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself and your role?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name's Helen Maylam. I am the new Principal Accountant within Corporate Finance. So part of my role is to present to you the key corporate risk monitor on a quarterly basis. Previously done
Helen,
by
could you
Sarah.
speak up? I'm a little bit deaf,
Okay.
and I just can't hear you. Either
Get a bit
that or
closer.
speak closer to the mic.
Do you want me to repeat all of that?
No, I got who you were.
Okay. So, shall I carry on? Yep. What I'm presenting to you today is the 4th and final key corporate risk monitor. Previously, Sarah Kirby has brought to you the other 3 monitors during the year, and this report follows a similar format to the one Sarah has brought to you. What you'll find is the details in Annex A for each of the key corporate risks, which have been updated following consultation with CMT and portfolio holders. In the report, within paragraphs 14 to 22, I've highlighted what the main changes are that I've made to the risk register. Although I should just highlight that there aren't any new risks added, new corporate risks, added, and no change to the scores. So at paragraph 14, if I just take you through what those main changes are. For KCR 1, there's a new risk detail added to do with the conflict in Ukraine. And there's also completed action in the form of the budget strategy for 22-23, and then a follow-on new action in respect to the forthcoming budget strategy for 23-24. KCR 2, the governance risk, a revised date has been added for reviewing the constitution. KCR 6, health and well-being, there's a completed action around the outbreak control plan, and then updates to reflect the change in controls for living with COVID approach. KCR 7, on the capital programme, that sort of mirrors KCR 1, so we've added the actions for the budget strategy changes and, the move to the new year budget strategy. KCR 8, local plan revised date has been added to that KCR. KCR 9 on communities, there's been some various updates on that risk, most notably to add in a bit of context and a new risk around the cost of living crisis, and then some new controls to try and mitigate that risk, and an additional action and a revised date as well to one of the actions on there. KCR 10 also has a revised date to an ongoing action to review HR policies, and some new risk details and controls also added. And then KCR 11 has also refers to the risk of the conflict in Ukraine. And KCR 12, that's just a revised date for the ongoing action to review the business continuity plans. my other point was to say that on Annex A, I've added a summary of what those changes are, just so that you don't always have to go through all the detail. That's one of the recommendations that came from portfolio holders, so that should speed things up for you a bit. So I think that's all the points I was going to take you through in terms of the report. If I'd open it up to questions at that point.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much. That was excellent. So I'll now open it to questions from members. Councillor Webb and then Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Helen, and welcome to what's the funnest committee at Council. We love it.
Thank you.
On the main body of the report, on page 10, I was just wondering, with the Health and Wellbeing Board now sort of running the COVID outbreak monitoring type thing, was that an enforced change, so to speak, or was that something that has been a choice, a governance choice at this council, or was that just sort of because we're now in the living with COVID stage, that was a decision that was taken sort of externally? And then while I'm at it, on paragraph 19, obviously regarding communities, there's been a lot of talk about the exclusion of disabled residents from the city centre. This might not fit into the communities bit, it might be sort of somewhere else, but there's of course a risk of legal action due to discrimination. I was wondering what we're doing to sort of consider that as a risk, where that fits in, and how we're sort of looking to deal with anything like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In terms of KCR 10, sorry, the health and wellbeing is KCR at 6, beg your pardon. I'm not sure, I'd have to go back and check about whether that was an enforced change or whether that's a move within North Yorkshire. So I can come back to that question though.
I'm just wondering whether the monitoring officer might have some additional information about that.
Chair, sorry, apologies for stepping in, Helen. I think the Outbreak Management Control Board was created as part of the coronavirus regulations. An awful lot, well, nearly all of those have now fallen. So I think it's the health professionals that have taken on the longer standing responsibility under their professional existing umbrella. So the Outbreak Management Board was created as a result of coronavirus regulations and health protection regulations. They've been gradually falling. The last raft of them fell on the 24th of March, and then obviously linked with the testing that fell on the 1st of April. So I think from memory, it is linked directly with that, and the health professionals have taken on with their existing arrangements.
Councillor, oh, sorry, Helen, did you want to address the KCR 9 point about the blue badge access and risk of legal action?
Beg your pardon. I haven't got an answer to that one. That I can go away and get one unless Janie's got a response.
So, Chair, I'm sorry, Helen. The risk of legal action is actually on my risk register for the governance department. So in the governance department, we obviously have the key corporate risks, but legal services has its own risk register as well. So it is a feature on that it's a risk, and it sits more with legal services about how we respond to it. Does it come in, sort of evidence gathering, etc. So it is on my departmental risk register as a potential legal issue which may arise.
Councillor Fisher.
Yeah. Page 32, key corporate risk 9. I noticed at the bottom, the new one of the new actions is to establishment of a food roles and communities team. Could you just give me a little bit of outline as to what the brief of that committee, that group is, please?
Sorry, I'm not used to the microphone. That's a point I'll need to take away and ask the officer about. I can get some more detail on what that job entails.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Helen, for the report. Can you just confirm that I've interpreted the material on page 29 correctly? And that is the final column where you've got revised date 31 December 2022. Is that the date at which the Neil Ferris, I take it, expects the local plan to be approved? Or is that a further review of what needs to be done? It's just interpretation, that's all. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, my interpretation of it, it was a review of the fact that it was an ongoing action and not necessarily the date for the local plan.
Right, okay, so it's a review date.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
exactly.
thank you.
Councillor Fisher, have you got a supplementary, or is that a separate question? Separate question. Please.
Thank you again, Chair. KCR, sorry, it's 9 against communities. One of the principal communities that the City of York Council has to work with is the parishes. And obviously, we've now got a parish charter, which has many things where we will work with and inform. I've had complaints from every one of my parishes about the parish charter having been broken within the first 3 months. For example, it says in the parish charter quite clearly that local communities, parish council will be informed whenever roadworks are going to take place, diversions or anything. In 3 cases in my ward, it hasn't happened. I mean, fine words, butter, no parsnips. We've got to make sure that when we adopt a parish charter, we actually implement it and make it work. So that's just an area I'm concerned about. Otherwise, we're going to find relations between the city council and parish councils breaking down.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's one that you can answer directly, Helen, but I'm just wondering if one of you could feed that through to Highways senior officers.
Yes, Chair, I will. And the parish charter is also going to be discussed shortly again by the Joint Standards Committee as well. And not on this topic, but about the role that the Joint Standards Committee has in terms of the monitoring and support of the parish council's charter as well. And I've had a helpful conversation today with York Local Councils Association. Have I said that in the right order? Yes. The person I spoke to is currently quite unwell at the moment, but when she's better, we're having a proper meeting to look more into how to work together and take it forward. Because obviously we're acutely aware that Charlie is retiring later this year.
Charlie.
So Croft.
Oh.
So we're going to be picking that up with the Joint Standards Committee as well.
Great, but just on that specific point, and I appreciate it's not a governance issue, but if somebody could just feed it back. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. In KCR2 on governance, there's mention of the decision-making processes and guidance that came in response to COVID-19. And Janie's just given us an answer to a different question where she explained that the legislation allowing that has gone. So can you just, I don't know whether it's for Janie or for you, to be honest, Helen, give us an update on where we are with governance in terms of the response to COVID-19, changing that and bringing in emergency powers, and where are we with that?
I think this one's the monitoring officer.
So the council has emergency powers written into its constitution already. And we just put more effectively, if I may say, meat on the bones about how those were operated during the lockdown. So i.e. that included appropriate consultation before the chief operating officer made a decision. So there will always be the ability to make urgent decisions in the constitution. That is a given. The constitution has been amended as the legislation has fallen. So, for example, the draft constitution that you all received for the said meeting on the 24th had part of it in Appendix 1 legislation to fall on the 24th of March, because that was the natural end date of that legislation. So what we do is undertake a regular review linked with the coronavirus legislation. So, for example, there are changes to the Director of Public Health powers, the public protection powers as well. So we've already changed the internal arrangements for that, and that will be reflected in the new constitution. And it's already reflected in the schemes of delegation that we've got, because those powers are being withdrawn because the legislation just doesn't exist anymore.
Do you have supplementary? Yes, I do, however, think that there needs to be some clearer definition in respect of when emergency powers are implemented, but I've written to you about that separately, monitoring officer. Councillor Webb, yeah, I forgot you. How could I?
Easy done, Chair. On page 34, on key corporate risk 10, workforce capacity, there is a new risk, pay structure issues causing pressure at lower end, having knock-on impacts on middle grades and especially supervisory roles around grade 5. And then on page 35, there are 3 new controls that have been added. And I assume that the 2 are linked, that the new risk links to the new controls. But could you just explain a little bit more about what that risk is and how we are mitigating that and what those controls will do, so to speak?
Apparently, I've just heard from the monitoring officer that we've got the head of HR actually on Zoom, who may be able to answer that.
Helen, you'll answer a question one day, but
It's a different Helen. A different Helen.
It's I'm happy for anyone.
Well, it's all right. Is it one that you feel comfortable with answering, Helen? Different.
I'll defer to the other Helen.
I thought you might say that.
Hello there. Yes, I am comfortable to answer that. I'm just whizzing through the agenda pack as we get. So sorry, was it page 35 you're referring to?
Yeah, Councillor Webb, could you just repeat your question?
I can try. Yeah, on there's a new a new risk on page 34, which is linked to key corporate risk 10, workforce and capacity. And the new risk is about pay structure issues causing pressure at lower ends, having knock-on impacts on middle grades. And then there's 3 new controls on the page 35. I'd just like to explore a little bit, because obviously that is, pay structure issues causing pressure does ring some alarm bells. I'm just wondering how those controls are going to make a difference to that risk, really.
Absolutely, yes. There is there's a national pay award, and because we also pay the national living wage, we've got what I'll call bunching up of grades. The bunching up of grades are meaning that we have got the likes of cleaners and potentially customer services advisors on the same grades. Being paid the same money, not on the same grades. They're being paid the same money. So obviously that does cause potentially some recruitment and retention issues. That's what it's talking about. In terms of the controls, we need to make sure that we we do manage these issues. And one of the controls is to review our pay and grading structure. That's what it's referring to. Nothing has been done as yet. It is a highlighted risk and it's something that we're looking at the moment, but it's something that we need to be very mindful of in terms of our strategy, in terms of being able to ensure that we have the right staff, and it's part and parcel of our OD plan and strategy.
Thank you, Helen. Chair, if I may. We have had recruitment and retention problems in a whole raft of areas for quite a long time. This sounds like something that should be done relatively quickly. Is there a time frame around this review and an action?
Well, we are dependent on things that are going nationally at the moment. You may be aware that the national agreement for 2021 was only actually agreed in February 2022. So the whole national agenda is behind already. We would ordinarily have liked our new pay structure to have been in for the 1st of April. However, nationally that is not, and it's not something we can unfortunately influence. It's national employers and our nationally recognised trade unions as part of the pay bargaining. So we're behind on that. So we do need to wait for that. We understand that there will be an offer on the table, and this is only a proposal at the moment from the trade unions, because that's the order of events, which is towards the end of May, so not too far away, of which then there is a national timetable for the employers to have a response back. That response back will take in excess of 2 months, because we do actually need to, the local government association does need to consult with all councils, and obviously CYC will be part of that. So within that time, we do have the opportunity to look at our local pay structure, but we should not really do anything until that national position is held. I would say summer, we should have some more details, and obviously we can provide a report back to you as part of future meetings as well.
Thank you. I think, yeah, a little bit more information about this would be really, really helpful long term, but thanks, that was a really helpful answer.
Okay.
So Helen, not you, Helen. Sorry, Helen, sorry, I'm looking at her. Yes, this not the disembodied Helen, the one that's actually in the room. Could that be incorporated into Monitor 1 when we receive that?
Yes, certainly. I'll make a note of that.
Thank you, Helen. I've got a question. And as I suspect all members and officers are concerned about the cost of living crisis and the impact of increasing poverty within the city, which I think is going to cut across a number of the key corporate risks that we have, that we've got identified here. And I'm just, although it mentions, I think in communities, cost of living crisis, I'm just wondering whether it ought to be more explicit as a specific risk to not only the income that the authority gets in, but health and well-being. You know, if we have significant issues with ill health as a direct consequence of poverty and being unable to heat your house or eat. I'm just wondering what discussions have taken place amongst yourselves, and whether you feel that poverty is something that should be identified as a specific risk across a range of key corporate risks.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Chair. I can see that we could incorporate that risk within a number of the KCRs, as you've mentioned, financial pressures, that KCR 1 rather, the KCR 6 health and wellbeing, and possibly into the KCR 11 external market conditions, because it will have a knock-on impact there as well. There's probably a bit more work there, because we've started to introduce it into KCR 9 and communities risk, and I think there's a bit more work we can do to add some detail into those other risks as well to pick up that cost of living issue. Thank you. I think Councillor Fisher's got, is that supplementary for Councillor Fisher? Mike?
I think this is a very serious problem for everybody, councils, government, the lot. And I mean, you look at the terrible conflict in Ukraine. We've got 25 million tonnes of wheat, which probably won't be harvested this year, which is going to add enormously to the, you know, sort of shortage of food around the world. It's going to impact very badly on a lot of people. And it's not just people who are on very basic wages, but people much higher up the income scale are going to suffer. I heard the other day that the biggest supplier of sunflower oil has only got 6 weeks supply of sunflower oil. And sunflower oil is used in just about everything, and they can't find alternatives. We are going to see massive problems with food supply, which is why I asked the question about what the purpose of the food group is and what, you know, how they will be involved in ensuring that people get a full belly at the end of the day.
I mean, that's, so it could even impact on school meals, etc.
It could impact on school meals, and it's also going to lead to some people not being able to pay the council tax. And at the end of the day, if they get into a position where they have a choice of paying council tax or heating the homes or feeding themselves, then I think they're going to choose the latter two. Yeah, and it could impact on the amount of income the council's got. So I think it's a massive issue.
Yeah, and that's why I thought financial pressures was one particularly that were relevant as far as the council's concerned. So I'll leave that with you, but it would be helpful if you were able, just at the next meeting, which I believe is in June, if Debbie or somebody could just feed back to us what your thoughts are on that.
Will do.
So thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to say well done. Debut appearance. I hope that wasn't too horrible for you.
No, thank you.
And we shall see you in a few months for the
Monitor one.
for the quarter one?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You can go if you want.
Thank you.
So agenda item 5 is, just bear with me. It's the auditor's annual report 2020-2021. We have representatives from Mazars who are joining us virtually. And I believe we have the two Marks. Are you there, Marks?
Yes, hello, Chair.
Yeah, hello, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Hoping you are too.
Yes, not too bad at all, thank you. Would you like to introduce your annual report?
Yes, of course, Chair. Thank you for the introduction. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clearly. Let me know if you can't. The report flagged in the agenda papers as a progress report is actually our last bit of audit reporting for the 2021 financial year. If members of the committee remember, when we issued our audit completion report, we did say that we would be issuing our value for money commentary in due course, and that's what the item 5 on the agenda papers is. So the auditor's annual report effectively replaces the annual audit letter, which we issued under the previous code of practice, and it includes a summary of the work that we did in relation to the account. So that's our opinion responsibility. And it also includes fuller commentary and discussion of our work on the City Council's arrangements for securing value for money in the use of public resources. And it's in that area where we spend, when most of the airtime is taken up with this report, and we refer to the criteria that the National Audit Office set out for audit suppliers as part of their considerations of every local authority in the country's value for money arrangements. And as members of the committee know, we referred to exceptions in our audit opinion in 2021 because of the issues surrounding decision making and the evidence that we gathered about the failure to act in the public interest when the exit package for the former chief exec was approved. And that is referred to in summary form at section 3 of the report. And the rest of that value for money arrangement section deals with 3 criteria: financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness in the use of public resources. There's also a section in there about the fees that we charge for our independent audit work. And as ever, Mark and I are happy to take any questions or comments from members of the committee on the content of the report. In response to the question at the outset from Mr. Mendes, and we are of course mindful of the work the council's doing in response to the public interest report, and we will keep Audit and Governance Committee informed of the extent to which we think that that's an ongoing risk. So as you said, Chair, this is a 2021 report. We will be preparing our audit plan for 21-22 shortly and sharing that with you. And of course, we'll be reporting the results of our work in 21-22 in both our audit completion report and in the next iteration of the annual auditor's report. Mr. Mendes also asked how we would get to those comments, what we would think about the progress the City Council's made in relation to the action plan. And of course, in the usual way, we're about to seek audit evidence about new policies and procedures, but also their application in practice. So that will be an important part of the work that we carry out in relation to our 21-22 responsibilities. We know that part of the City Council's response has been to involve the Local Government Association, and we'll also keep in view the findings of the work that the LGA does and any recommendations that they make, and we'll take those into account when we issue our audit completion report and our annual auditors report. So I'm stopping there, Chair, and inviting comments and questions.
Thank you. So that was one question I was just going to ask you. So you will be liaising with the LGA?
Yes, Mr. Edgehill and I share contact details, and I'm aware of the reports that have been issued so far.
And they will, yes, so they will keep you informed when they do issue progress reports to this committee.
I can confirm they've got the opportunity to do that, Chair.
Oh, great. Well, we can ask them to make sure that that happens.
Yeah.
Councillor Webb, you raised your hand early.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, thank you for your report and thank you for your work. I think it's really impressive and really clear and concise, which I really like. On section 3, in respect of the severance of the former chief exec position by the current council leader, just to follow on from what you've just been talking about, really, sort of what form, I'm just trying to get my head around it. I imagine it won't be the council has done what it said it was going to do and it's worked, and therefore we're never going to talk about it again, or will it be more of a commentary on what's going on, or how does the result of a PIR work? Is there a point where you say yes, or everything has now been addressed? And then sort of as a supplementary to that, you know, if further issues of governance related to decision making came out, like from now on or at any time in sort of the next year, would that form part of this process, or would that form the start of a new process? You know, how do you look at other situations that are ongoing in council, or is it literally just this was one instance in time and then we're doing actions to deal with that one instance? How does that sort of play in?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor. We won't be getting to a situation in which we do some sort of formal sign-off of the action plan. That's for you and management to work out between yourselves. What we're required to do, remember, is carry out work sufficient for us to be satisfied about the council's arrangements for value for money. And so when you set out those scenarios, effectively it was option A or B. A, sign off, or B, do we have an ongoing set of audit procedures and tests to make sure that we get up-to-date evidence about the arrangements that are in place for the year of audit? It's option B. So if there is any evidence of compliance and any evidence of non-compliance, take all of that into account when we're considering the bundle of evidence that we've got in relation to each of the arrangements we expect to be in place that are relevant to the 3 criteria that are in the annual audit report. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm happy to deal with any supplementaries, of course.
I think you had do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
I do, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, really. I mean, obviously recently we were meant to have a full council meeting that was cancelled abruptly. And I'll be honest, I don't really know the details behind that. There were sort of reasons given, but it did seem very irregular. And something like that happening, you know, is that something that would play into this report, or would it be something that would form a separate statement and it wouldn't have any effect on something like this?
Yeah, thank you. I was one of the 15 people viewing the meeting on YouTube. That didn't take place that evening. So yes, I was slightly disappointed that it didn't go ahead. But in terms of the postponement, we haven't formed a view on whether that's evidence of some sort of deficiency or whether it's just an opportunity for the City Council to make sure that all reports are in order before meetings actually take place. So we haven't reached a view on that, Councillor.
Sorry, was that you haven't or you have?
We haven't, Chair.
Haven't, thank you.
Just one more then. So that does mean that when you say you haven't reached a view, you are intent on taking a view, or you are looking at this and you are talking to people about what happened?
It's more that we take into account all of the decision-making arrangements for the whole year so that we don't reach an audit judgment based on individual items and incidents. We need to reach a rounded view before we prepare our value for money commentary. So it's taken account of in a bundle of evidence, and in doing that way, we make sure that the conclusions we reach are proportionate and properly based on evidence.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you. Mark, on page 64, where you've got a breakdown of your fees, additional fees in respect of the new VFM approach and identified significant weaknesses in arrangements. I'm taking that to be the PIR related issues. You've got a figure there quoted of £20,045. On page 81, which is a different agenda item, where we've got the financial impact of the PIR as at the 30th of July 2021, it's got additional audit fees of 23,467. Can you explain where the discrepancy is? Was that something that was in the previous financial year, or I will also ask Debbie, but those two figures are slightly different.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that, Chair. I can't account for the figures that are in someone else's report, but as far as section 4 of our report's concerned, you can see the two columns setting out the additional fees in relation to each financial year. And you're quite right, the part of the additional fee in relation to the new value for money approach is because of the circumstances surrounding the public interest report and full council's approval of the action plan in response to that report in the new financial year. You know that we included exceptions in our audit opinion, and when we do that, we need to make sure that we exercise our professional judgment carefully, and one of the mechanisms for doing that is the involvement of other partners in the audit closure procedures to make sure that the audit judgments reached and reported are fair, proportionate, and properly backed up by audit evidence. So there's an additional dollop of review that takes place of all audit files that include unusual reports. And the City of York Council, of course, has included an unusual report because of the exceptions included in the audit opinion.
Thank you. So when we get to that agenda item, I can ask that of Debbie. But yeah, that explains that. Are there any other questions? No. Mark, oh, no, sorry, we've got Councillor Webb.
Sorry, Mark, I thought at least someone else would have a go. I was holding back. My final question is in our report, it's on page 56, which is the financial sustainability value for money arrangements. It's in the bit that says how the council plans to bridge funding gaps and identifies achievable savings. Hopefully this is a reasonably simple one. About 3 paragraphs down, the 2021 budget included savings of approximately 4.3 million, of which approximately 2.9 million was achieved. And that comes out as about 2/3. I was just wondering, are you aware of whether this is good as councils go, whether this is pretty average as councils go? I'm just trying to sort of get a gauge on whether this is something that we're on par for, if we're doing okay at.
Yeah, the year in question was quite an unusual one, Councillor. If you recall, the public health emergency was affecting spending patterns, so I'm not really sure it would be good to reach conclusions about proportions, given the fact that both yours and other local authority spending was deflected to a huge extent by the need to respond to the pandemic. So that's not a conclusion that we've reached.
That's fine, thank you.
Cool. I don't think there are any further questions. So thank you very much, as always. And we look forward to seeing you again sometime later in the year. I'm not exactly sure when. We've got the forward plan later on. That's great. Take care, and we shall speak soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So we handily move on to the next agenda item, which is the progress against the action plan prepared in response to the public interest report. And I shall hand over now to Janie Berry, the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chair. As members have requested on the last occasion, we have brought the broken down details of the delivery behind the action plan. And happy to take any questions, really. It's quite a detailed programme, but I think Debbie and I and Helen, I think who's still with us, happy to take any questions on it.
Oh, the other Helen.
Yes, Helen Whiting,
Yes.
sorry.
I've got two hands. I'm going to go to Councillor Lomas first.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question relating to page 75, R3, recommendation 3. It says everything's been achieved in relating to that one, but we haven't yet approved the new constitution, have we? So it just seems a bit odd that we didn't have an action to approve the new constitution, because that is the bit of work that's outstanding from my understanding.
Yeah, in terms of the officers' actions to do as part of reviewing the constitution, we have done that. There is a commentary in which is that will go to full council for approval in April 2022. So I'm on the electronic copy, but it's in the final row on page 75. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column along from the left. So it's then to full council in April 2022. So which we've still got to set a date for full council. So that's my page 75. I've got one. Sorry, I'm just going off the electronic copy. Yeah. So if I point it out, would that be easier? So on page 75, there's an updated commentary there, but this is from terms of an officer perspective, this is the actions that we've undertaken. So I'm happy to add an additional entry that it still needs full council approval, but it's published. There's no changes that can be made to it at the moment because the meeting is adjourned. So it remains in a status quo position with the published draft constitution at this moment in time.
Councillor Lomas, do you have a supplementary? Because I've got a supplementary.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I saw that note, but that is around the action relating to conflicts of interest, and we've already adopted the new code of conduct, haven't we? We did that at previous council meetings. So I'm just wanting to capture somewhere in the action plan that there is a piece of work to make sure that the constitution gets either approved at full council or something happens to get it to a state where it can be approved. And it just, you know, when you look through that, it says, yes, everything's achieved and it's all rosy, but it's not quite. We've got a little bit of work yet to do. And it'd be good to capture that, because I appreciate that's not an officer action necessarily. It's something for full council, but obviously we have to actually do that piece of work. And if you were to just pick this up as an action plan and look through it, well, everything's achieved, wonderful. And it is good that we've done so much work in quite a short space of time. But I think we should also reflect that there is just a few little bits left to do.
I've also got a question in respect of the Constitution being formally adopted, and you know, and I'm afraid I do have to keep going back to this aborted meeting that that happened last a fortnight ago. As you know, the agenda for that full council included the adoption of the Constitution. there was a proposal then to move the meeting to a hybrid informal meeting. My understanding of the existing constitution that is still extant is that, and I believe in the new constitution as well, is that adoption or amendment of constitutional changes can only be made by members and cannot be delegated to an officer, even head of paid service. So can you explain to me how, had that meeting taken place on an informal basis, how that would have been able to be adopted by the head of paid service, particularly as under the emergency powers, the head of paid service can ignore any decisions that have been come to at an informal meeting?
So to clarify, as statutory officers, both Debbie and I can make very technical amendments to the Constitution. For example, to adopt legislative changes which take immediate effect, or financial regulations, for example, so that we don't fall foul of financial or legal rules, essentially. The Chief Operating Officer would not have made a decision on the Constitution, but apart from defer the Constitution to a next physical meeting. So he would not, my advice to him, and he also advised me, is that he would not make any decision on the Constitution at all.
So that agenda item wouldn't have taken place. I had that meeting.
The members could have chosen to debate it, but had the decision been made, the Chief Operating Officer would not have made it. So the item, his only decision would be, it would be deferred to a next meeting of full council.
Right. So
which effectively is suspending the agenda item to a next meeting. So he would not have made that. That was my advice, and he was very clear he was not going to do that in any event.
That would have been helpful to have known beforehand, but thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. On the same point that Councillor Omas raised, actually, R3, page 75, just above where you've just been pointing out to us. So hopefully it's a reasonably technical one. The monitoring officer will undertake a 6-monthly review of all aspects of the Constitution. And then below that, the Audit and Governance Committee will undertake an annual review of the Constitution. I suppose what's the link going to be going forward? Because if you're doing it every 6 months, but we're only doing it every year, are you going to sit on things for 6 months, or what would happen there?
So the Constitution up to my arrival at the council had not been fundamentally looked at, reviewed, considered by members or officers in some great depth, apart from the tick box exercise, which took place immediately, I think the week before lockdown. And that was the only change that had been made to it since 2016 from the evidence that I've located. The idea of the 6-monthly review is internal with chief officers. And that, for example, is to ensure that schemes of delegation are kept up to date, that they're not just languishing somewhere, so that we always make sure that the officers have got the correct authorities to make the correct decisions. For example, the most prominent area is around trading standards, public protection, enforcement, like food enforcement, for example. We always need to make sure that they're on top of the legislative powers that they have and keep it under constant review. So it's about commencing a different conversation about the Constitution, to try and back to what Mark was just saying around demonstrating embedding of a different culture and a different, more positive outlook amongst officers around what does good governance look like. People should be having conversations about the Constitution. It is also an opportunity for me. There is a process written into the new Constitution about various methodologies I may undertake to review the Constitution, which may be dialogue with chairs and vice chairs, for example. Do you think your terms of reference are fit for purpose? Is there something that we're missing? Do you want to add it to a review? Have you got any observations, or have you been to other meetings where you've got observations that you want to share? There may be recommendations coming out of new work that comes from the LGA or the government, anything like that. So it's keeping it under review. It is always good practice for a committee such as the Audit and Governance Committee to undertake an annual review of the Constitution to make sure that members are cited on it. The timing of that, however, I've been very vague in this, and I will be very vague, because you need to put, if there are changes that Audit and Governance need to make, there needs to be a decision by this council of whether you want those changes to be discussed at annual council, which here historically is a very civic event, and we don't do business a civic ceremonial event, or time it so that the Audit and Governance Committee has time to consider the fitness for purpose test of the Constitution in time for example, a March full council meeting, which would mean that changes can take effect in readiness for annual council, which would cover appointments to committees, outside bodies, etc., whatever decisions may be required. So the timing, I do need to work with the chair and vice chair, to be fair, on when that would take place. But in my head, it's around our January, February meeting to fit with, can't go to budget council, so to fit with March council really, and then take in effect any changes to avoid any business being required at full council. That is best practice. That is what I'm used to in other authorities. It tends to work and it helps build a conversation. Building in from this as well, I will also ask Joint Standards Committee to look at the Code of Conduct policy that we've got, which is the model LGA and the code, and the LGA will also tell us when there's needs to be amendments. But we also, Joint Standards Committee also has to look at the associated procedures because they are local to York. So what we don't have at the moment is the associated procedures to support the model code. The Joint Standards Committee have confirmed all of those and asked for them to be in the Constitution. But again, there will be an equivalent fitness for purpose test around the ethical governance framework with Joint Standards Committee, which that needs to be timed to feed into commentary with this committee so that you've got the overall view of the ethical governance framework and the comprehensive, more sort of like nuts and bolts governance framework. So I'm sorry that's a bit long-winded, and I can't be specific on timeframes, but in my head, it's kind of the late autumn, spring style meetings that we'd aim to do that with. And it doesn't have to be War and Peace about going through the Constitution line by line, page by page. It can be, you know, what's the outcome of the 6-monthly reviews? Can we have some feedback from internal audit? We've built in to the audit plan this year that internal audit will also monitor global compliance with the Constitution, give any feedback to this committee, myself and Debbie and Ian as well. So it's taking information from various sources. I'm envisaging the LGA continuing to support us for a while, taking on views that you've heard from Mark as well, so that it does remain a constant conversation and starts being a normal conversation to have. Other conversations where we need to have it as well is around member development, member induction for the 4-yearly election cycle as well. We need to have a really comprehensive member induction plan. Part of having a healthy conversation about the Constitution means that the induction programme, the training around the Constitution doesn't become outfacing. It doesn't become like a weird, like 900-page document that you might have to read. It's how to read it, how to use it. If new members come on board, it's existing members that mentor those new members in terms of what is a good governance conversation to have. So it kind of builds up from there. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I think Councillor Webb's got a supplementary and then Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. March councils, do you remember when we used to have them? You've just mentioned about internal audit having a view on aspects of the Constitution and whether we're complying with the Constitution. Is that something that we're considering investigating regarding the March Council that never happened? Because obviously that wouldn't have complied. I can't get my head around whether that would have or would not have complied with the Constitution that we currently have. So is that something that would happen?
So the decisions that we've taken around March full council do fall within the remit of the current Constitution and the future Constitution. Internal audit are fully aware of the circumstances and being fully appraised of that. What I mean by a Constitution being, and perhaps Max is here, but what I've asked as the monitoring officer is independent assurance and support around compliance on the Constitution. Whilst I'm legally responsible for decision making of the council, I can't possibly know everything that is made in every single service. It's just impossible. Therefore, a bit like this committee, I have to seek assurances from elsewhere. Rather than have a defined line in the audit plan that says Constitution, what I've asked Max and his team to do is to consider that as part of every relevant audit that is featured in their plan, if they come across elements which touch upon the Constitution, so for example, link in with decision-making, officer decision-making, scheme of delegation, information governance, ethics, then it will be a particular question that internal audit will hopefully ask or explore if there is an issue, and then either provide concerns to me and this committee that we can address and pick up in learning with chief officers, learning with a team, bringing back to this committee. We can redraft a section, but it's about using different sources of assurance that I've got available. And it's also offering some independence away from me. And it gives you the opportunity as Audit and Governance Committee to actually seek internal audit's views from as an independent source of overview for the governance perspective. So it's an additional assurance factor that I've built in, and it fits in with the 3 lines of defence and assurance model that audit operates under.
Thank you. I'm just mindful that Councillor Mason has to leave. So do you want to say anything, or do you just?
No, I mean, I'm amazed how quickly we've got through the agenda so far. Actually, there's only 2 items left. We've done very well. Yeah, no, I've got a civic engagement tonight at the Mansion House, so I need to leave, I'm afraid, to head over there.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And what I'm going to do, given that we have got Max here, and rather than hold that question and Janie's response, I just wonder whether Max Thomas, Chief Exec at Verito, could just add anything as to how it's going to work in practice from an internal audit perspective.
Yeah, well, I think Janie's actually described how we see it working very well. I'm not sure I can add very much to it. Obviously, through our audit work, we're effectively an extra set of eyes and ears, and we will be specifically looking at compliance with the new constitution through our routine audit work. So as we do.
So will that change your existing processes for internal audit to incorporate the new constitution?
I don't see it as a change really. It's just a slight re-emphasis of the work programme. So just as we, in recent years have included looking at sort of compliance with data protection and GDPR, that because that's become more of an issue, we make sure that we cover those areas through our routine audit work. We'll just do the same with the new constitution.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. The first part is just an observation, which is concerning the induction programme for elected members. I'm a fairly Radcliffe councillor, and I've served on 2 other authorities. And in each case, their induction programme was a lot more comprehensive than it was at City of York. And City of York, for a new councillor, somebody like Councillor Lomas, Councillor Webb, coming on fresh to the council, never having served before, it's a big, scary place. There's an awful lot to learn. And, you've got to fast. I think we need better training. And I think members should be heavily involved in that, because after all, we know what we need to know to do the job. The second point is about the ongoing training and the mandatory training that's outlined on page 78. It says mandatory training. What if members decide not to undergo it, refuse? Because I can see 1 or 2 councillors who might not want to do the training. Would we refer that to the joint standards? And therefore, if we did that, would there be the nuclear option of suspending the committees? That doesn't stop them acting as councillors on full council. It doesn't stop them acting as councillors in the community. I just wonder how we're going to monitor whether members actually do the training and what sanctions we're going to take if they don't take it. So I think it's very important that members do undertake training.
Thank you. Do you want to quickly answer that?
Yes. So the Joint Standards Committee are considering the options that they have available. Whilst there is no sanctions, what they do want is to have a public meeting whereby perhaps attendance at training is discussed. And so that, because it's like I think their view at the moment, but it has to be crystallized yet, is that a public naming and shaming of people who routinely do not attend training is something for public record. And so they do want to have a more active role in monitoring the attendance at training, monitoring the member development that is offered as part of the ethical governance framework as well. Obviously, this committee may have a role in it as well, because you may want to feed into that. And so there's an opportunity, I suspect, for some joint working going forward around bringing the 2 governance frameworks together. Obviously, a key part of embedding all our procedures is making sure that everybody accesses the training that is provided. We're currently working with Helen Whiting, who is on the meeting, working with the LGA as well, who also provide training and have offered to provide training in certain areas as well. Also working with the Planning Advisory Service at the moment and other external advisors around the type and nature of training to be provided and how that is provided as part of an induction program, but how it's also provided as part of a refresh program. So we're currently looking at all of our options and drawing together a skeleton member development program, which is a large part of our work for the remainder of this year, because it absolutely needs to be in place and approved by members and have the input of members way before we go into the pre-election period in early part of 2023.
Cool.
So that is a huge part of, now that we've got the frameworks in place, the training is the softer approach that we can do that. Joint Standards Committee, I must admit, has previously not really had a public debate around member training. Chair and Vice Chair are keen to promote that and have a clearer, stronger role, and they feel that members should manage members in terms, if they manage members in terms of conduct, you should also manage members in terms of the training and participating in the expectations of what a good ethical governance framework looks like.
I mean, maybe it's something that should come to a council meeting actually, and the chair of joint standards.
It may be a recommendation that both
yeah.
committees want to jointly put together, and all options are on the table, to be honest. It's because it's a new conversation.
Yeah, no,
we're kind of exploring it, because there's also some training to be provided, for example, to parish councils on various aspects as well, about better working relationships, parish charter, for example. So I'm envisaging, once we're in the new municipal year, it will be a sort of quite a topic for this committee and the Joint Standards Committee, but I'm not ruling out an option of some joint working for the two committees for the governance responsibility.
And at this stage, I'm going to take chair's prerogative because I need a short comfort break. So we're going to break for 10 minutes, and we'll be back at just after 6:45. Yeah? Yeah. Cool. Cool. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of Audit and Governance. We were still in agenda item 6, which was the monitoring officer's report. And I'll go to the question that I asked Mark Kirkham from Mazars about the costs of the PIR. They quoted a figure of 20,400 something. You've got on page 81, additional audit fees in relation to the PIR of 23,467. Can you explain the discrepancy?
Yeah, I can, Chair. Helpfully, Mark Outside has emailed me to remind me. So the 23,467 is the actual the work that was done for the actual public interest report itself. So that was the investigation work that Mazars did, their report that they brought to full council, and all that additional work, investigating, speaking to officers, getting their own legal advice. The 20,045 that's included in the report this evening is the amount for the new value for money work. And Mark has said a small amount of it relates to the significant risk weakness work, i.e. the public interest report, but most of it is for the recurrent value for money work ongoing. So they are two different figures and two different things.
Two different issues?
Yeah, so the 23,467 is correct. That is the cost of the work that Mazars did on the public interest report. The 20,045 that was in the report earlier on the agenda is for the new value for money work, and a small amount of it may relate to ongoing looking at the issues and risks, but I don't think they'll be able to separate that out for me, but I can pick that up with Mark later.
Lovely, thank you very much. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Debbie. On the same point, I mean, on page 81, we have additional audit fees that you've just outlined of £23,467. We've got £140 as external support, special employment law advice of £2,300, and specialist support to assist with the development, implementation and mandatory training of all elected members. And following on from what Janie said earlier, I mean, that's cost us £7,900 so far, but obviously we've talked about the fact that training is ongoing, there might be more. And this was as at the 30th of July, 2021. Obviously that's about 9 months-ish ago now. So is there a further update?
No, we should have updated, because that is up to date. There's been no further expenditure since the 30th of July 2021. I did actively check that. I checked that with Janie and with Janie's executive support assistant to make sure we hadn't incurred any further costs. There may well be other costs to come. I think we'll need to consider as we go forward, when do we consider the PIR finished and it's business as usual. So something like member training, you could argue, is business as usual. So there'll be a cut-off point, I think, or something. But I'm keeping it up to date. So as and when, if we do incur any costs, I'm kind of keeping an eye on that. And then I think we'll maybe just have a conversation here about the point, well, kind of, is it done now, and is this business as usual?
Would it be possible to make any sort of financial estimation as to how much internal council officer time?
I dread to think. I think that would be quite an eye-watering number, quite honestly, because I can't speak for Janie, but I know I've spent a significant amount of my time on this.
Solely working on the PIR, to the exclusion of your normal.
Yeah, there's been a significant amount of officer input, which is why, I mean, it's a relatively small amount, actually, the external costs, and that is because we've got external guidance and advice where we felt it was necessary, but we've used officer time to try and because, you know, officers have got to maintain and carry this on, haven't we? So there's only so much you can get done externally, and the majority of it has to be officers just getting stuck in, really.
So so basically this PIR has cost us big time.
In terms of staff time, it's a significant amount of both mine and Janie's and Helen, and before Helen Trudy's time, and then the associated, you know, business support, so exec support assistants doing the action planning and chasing up the actions and the time spent. So, you know, yes, we got some external legal advice to do the framework for the business case preparation, but obviously we had to go through that with them. We had to discuss that. We had to bit of to and fro in. So yeah, there's been a lot of officer time. A lot of officer
To be summed up as eye-watering.
I dread to
No,
think-
I get
I
it.
don't know whether Jane is
I
ready, but
absolutely,
dread-
I
you
absolutely
know,
get it, but you know.
I haven't worked it out, but it would be, I would have said that probably a good 50% of my time in it, you know, of a equivalent of a year. So the equivalent of 6 months of my salary. And I'm guessing probably a similar amount for Jenny, if not more.
Probably 75% of my time has
Wow.
been on actions relating to the public interest report and the document that you've got today. So, yeah.
Well, it's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it, that one? Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thank you. And while I think we all would have preferred to avoid that situation, I think, you know, actually the public will be reassured that officer time has been dedicated to making sure we put right the things that have gone wrong. But I just wanted to ask another question about the financial impact of the PIR. So we've got this assessment of various different costs, but I understood that there were also costs of legal advice relating to the council meeting where we discussed the PIR. So have they been incorporated somewhere?
As far as I'm aware, it's all in here. So that is the external ward hadaway support. So the legal costs, it is literally everything that has been spent relating to the public interest report is all accounted for, as Debbie's just said. Yeah, there's nothing else.
Oh, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Whilst accepting this has been an expensive process, it has identified, the PIR identified significant problems in process, both with officers and members and the way they function. At least the consolation of this, we've put those right. So the council should work better in the future. It's been an expensive process, but at the end of the day, we'll come out with a better council that functions better. And that is one of the benefits of it.
Yeah, and it's making sure that you apply learning, you understand what the issues were, and you do something about them. Councillor Webb.
I'd just follow that one up, Councillor Fisher, and say we're not quite there yet. I mean, we failed to have a council meeting in March, and it's very unclear as to why. Yes, there is learning, and as the chair has said, we do need to apply that learning. But yeah, I take your point. It was a valuable exercise, and I hope we never have to repeat it, and I hope we can stop paying for it soon. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
Follow that up by saying, yes, I think we all hope that the 2014 public interest report will be the last one we ever saw, but you know, this one turned up. Again, in each case, it identified flaws in the council systems and processes, and they've been put right. So,
thank you. If there aren't any further questions, I'd like to thank you both for those contributions, which were incredibly helpful. Well, I found so. So we'll now move on to agenda item 7, and the next few agenda items are in relation to Max. Max, would you like to introduce your report?
Thank you, Chair. So this first report is our regular progress report, where we provide details of the internal audit and counter fraud work that we've undertaken, and specifically since the last report to the committee in January. So there are two parts to the report. The first covers internal audit work. The second covers the work of our counter fraud team. So if I start with the internal audit first, the sort of details of that work set out in Annex 1, and there are a series of sections. So if I just go through those sections, the first on Appendix A on page 90, that lists the current status of internal audit work, so work that's ongoing as we at the moment, as well as the reports that we've issued in the year to date. The second part is Appendix B on page 92, and that's looking forward. So that's identifying the work that we intend to do next. Then Appendix C, that provides details of the 3 audits that we've finalised since January. So there are 3 reports, and as the committee will note, 2 of those reports were given 2 of those audits were given a substantial assurance opinion, and the 3rd, which was the ordering and creditor payments audit, that received a reasonable assurance opinion. And then finally, on the internal audit section, we've summarised the results of the follow-up testing that we've undertaken in the year in Appendix E. And just to note that there's no particular issues or concerns from that follow-up work that we want to highlight to the committee at this stage. So the second part of the report covers counter-fraud work, and that's set out in Annex 2. Hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory, so I won't go into any great detail on that, but happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Mr. Mendes raised a couple of points, and I saw you taking some notes. I just wondered, do you have any comments on the issues relating to, specifically, the increase in purchases that are made without a purchase order?
Well, I think as the audit's highlighted, the council has got a no purchase order, no pay policy. So we were looking to make sure that that policy was being complied with. We found that in a quite significant number of cases that wasn't happening. So we've raised it. We will then follow up the actions that management are taking to raise awareness and make sure that there is a greater level of compliance across all the services within the council.
So Debbie, that kind of falls into your remit. How have you driven any recommendations forward, and to what extent do you feel that this no pay without order that hasn't been happening has impacted on the council?
Yeah, it's as I was saying to Mr. Mendes just before the meeting, I'm not overly concerned. Can you not hear me? Sorry.
I can't hear you. I'm really sorry.
This isn't an area of particular concern. It's not causing me great concern. That's not to say I'm complacent about it either. The reason that it's not causing me a particular concern is of the actions outlined in the audit report. All bar one, which isn't due to July, has been completed to my knowledge. So a significant amount of work has been going on. I myself got an update from a member of my team earlier in this back end of last week regarding work that they've done. There are regular reports being issued to staff that are involved. There's additional guidance, additional training. So, you know, it's something that we're taking seriously. And I think I'm not sure exactly when the field work was done, but the report was issued you know, earlier, so yeah, January of this year, which means that a lot of the field work has been done over the last 12 to 18 months. And absolutely during parts of dealing with the pandemic, we absolutely allowed people to do things without raising a purchase order because, you know, things were needed urgently. That's not to say that every single one of those will be an urgent COVID issue. We were aware of this issue prior to the pandemic, so I'm not using that as an excuse by any means. And there are those staff that sometimes don't follow the processes, and we take action to deal with that, and we chase that up, and we continue to do that. So it's part of our bread and butter work, really, is to just keep on top of these things. I'm happy to admit it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be something that doesn't quite work out right. Somebody will, you know, not raise the purchase order in time, or they'll raise it and it doesn't get authorised and it goes ahead, you know, all sorts of things that can happen, but we do take it seriously and we are monitoring it very closely.
So when it was happening on this kind of increased basis, was it an issue of training? Was it an issue of line management processes? I mean, Sorry, I'm looking at you. It might be an issue for both of you, but it does seem a significant, albeit that you're not overly worried from a loss perspective, but from a process perspective, I think it is a significant issue, isn't it?
I don't know whether Max has a different view, but predominantly, in my view, it's predominantly a training issue, and it's one of those things that absolutely sometimes it gets a little bit lax, a little bit slack, and it's one of those things we just need to keep reminding people and keep. These things tend to go on a bit of a cycle. There are a lot of staff who can raise purchase orders. We're constantly reviewing the scheme of delegation and the levels of authority so that we know who can authorise orders. We don't always get that right. Sometimes there are too many people, sometimes there are not enough people. So there can be a bit of a backlog if we haven't got enough people available to authorise orders. And some of it is just predominantly a training issue. We have a business support function that can raise purchase orders on behalf of managers. And again, we just need to keep reminding those staff that are following a process, that they do follow the process.
I mean, my experience of community involvement officers is, you know, when you're trying to do a ward scheme, you can't get anywhere without a purchase order. So, you know, I think there is clear good practice going on.
And I would point out there are a lot of positives mentioned in the report from Verito as well. A lot of areas where they say it's very good practice, it's a very effective system. But inevitably, we focus on the things that are not working so well, but there are a lot of positives and a lot of things that do work very well in the system.
Max?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, I mean, I was going to say, actually, in the audit work, we didn't find any erroneous payments or payments that were of concern, or no duplicate payments. So in terms of the work that we did, we found nothing that suggested that payments were being made when they shouldn't be. But there's clearly a process issue here. It is true that the audit was looking at the period very much during the pandemic, so a lot of the transactions were taking place during that period. I haven't got any evidence to back this up, but my suspicion is that will have been a factor, and that people were under quite a lot of pressure, and some of the sort of the basic procedures were allowed to slip. Clearly, that's not. We shouldn't be in that position, and we need to get back to a position where those procedures are working more effectively. Yeah,
cool. I've just got a question on Appendix E, which is the follow-up of agreed actions. You say that there was an increase in actions not being completed within the time frame originally stipulated within the audit, but that's improving as the COVID restrictions are relaxed but what's that down to? Is it that people are working differently? Is it the fact that people are coming back more into the office? Was this a home working issue? What were you finding as to why actions weren't being followed up by the time scales that you'd originally set?
Yeah, well, anecdotally, I mean, it's the same sort of issue that during the height of the pandemic, most staff were under so much pressure that some of the actions they just couldn't invest the time and effort needed to address some of these actions, quite understandably in the circumstances. We are clearly seeing that situation is improving, and people are now getting back to sort of business as usual and dealing with many of the actions. So, which is why we don't feel it's necessary to raise it as a particular issue. We think that things are back on track, or certainly we're going in the right direction.
Thank you. That's really helpful. On page 100, paragraph 8, you make reference to 2 mandate frauds with a combined total potential loss of £830,000. That's a massive amount. And whilst obviously I'm not expecting you to go into the operational issues, what learning did we take from those attempted mandate frauds? How common are international or indeed national gangs targeting councils? Did the pandemic raise any particular heightened risks? As I say, I'm not expecting you to go into any sort of detail as to what happened, but what did we learn and how have we applied it?
Okay, I think I'll probably make a few points. First of all is all councils are being targeted with this type of fraud. And it's not just councils, it's across the public sector. This is a feature of most payment systems, that they are being targeted in this way. And some councils have actually ended up losing money. And there was a case in the press only this week where a council not so far away from here lost a substantial sum of money. So it's happening all the time. So that's the first one. The second point is that these frauds are becoming more and more sophisticated. So as organisations put in measures to prevent them, the fraudsters are changing their approach and trying to find ways around it. So they are becoming more and more sophisticated. So I think the learning, and these are cases in point where it highlights the need for everyone to be really alert all the time and to report anything that looks suspicious. And if anyone is in any doubt, not to proceed with a payment.
That's helpful. So our staff being regularly updated if there are new methods used to try to get payment out of any public sector organisation, but we're talking about the council now. Our staff routinely made aware of there's this thing that's doing the rounds at the moment, or there's this thing that you need to be mindful of, or is it just a generic anything that looks suspicious, flag up?
Well, without going into too much detail, the most recent case, not just these, but elsewhere, have adopted a slightly different approach, and that has highlighted the need to make some change. And we've reviewed all our member councils and some of our other clients to make sure that we're alert to these sort of threats. So in terms of looking forward, I think the main thing is we keep reviewing to make sure that people are complying with the processes that are in place, and we keep raising awareness of the threat.
Thank you. That's really helpful. If there aren't any other questions, then we shall move on to agenda item 8, which is the internal audit and counter fraud plans for this coming year.
Thank you, Chair. So as the committee will recall, in January we brought an indicative list of areas to audit for the coming year, and we sought members' comments and suggestions for areas to prioritise in terms of our work programme. So we're now coming back to the committee to seek your approval for this work programme. So we have incorporated the comments and suggestions from the previous meeting. The programme itself is attached as Annex 1. I would perhaps just highlight a couple of things. So the first is that this programme it's a high level, it's meant to be flexible, and it will inevitably change as the year progresses. We'll keep the programme under review. So as we reprioritise work, that will determine when we actually schedule the work, but it also may result in audits being headed into the programme and other audits dropping out, so that there will inevitably be change. What we've also done is we've effectively over-programmed. We can't, in the days available to us, complete all the audit work on that list, but by over-programming, it does allow us then to it provides some flexibility in terms of as we start the audit year. So the plan itself is set out in Annex 1. We do need the committee to sort of formally approve it, but obviously we'll carry on coming back through the year with regular updates. And then for information, we've also included the corporate fraud plan as well, and that's attached as Annex 2 to the report.
So, for example, you've got an indicative list here of what's priority and what you're planning to do. If something came up, let's say just for example, a major fraud or a whistleblowing issue, and you felt that was so significant that you really wanted to look into that, so how do you then decide, no, we're adding something to the list, or we want to do this now? Do you discuss it with the statutory officers? Who makes that decision?
If it's a fraud or a whistleblowing issue, that's effectively covered by the counter fraud programme of work.
Right.
Where issues are brought to our attention, we do a sifting exercise. So we do try to quickly establish what the facts are and whether there is fraud involved, or the scale of it, or whether actually it is the council that's the victim. Or so we do some initial filtering before we decide whether we actually carry out an investigation or not. But if we think there's merit and it's there's evidence of fraud and it's in the council's interest, we will investigate it within that programme. In terms of the audit work, if something new comes along, which is not sort of reflected through our ongoing discussions with Janie as our client, we will decide whether it's something we will then pick up or not. And equally, Janie or Debbie may well request us to do work which isn't in the programme, or which we're not otherwise planning to look at. So there's that ongoing dialogue between us as audit, Janie and Debbie as effectively our client.
Is there anything you'd like to add? No? No, excellent.
No, that's exactly as Max has outlined, and I feel confident that I can raise issues with Max, and then is confident for his independence to decide what action he wishes or not to take.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? But we do have to formally approve this. So can I ask, we will do a show of hands. Can I just ask that our colleagues satisfied that we adopt the plan as outlined in Annex A? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you very much. So then we move on to the final agenda item, which is the indicative work plan. We did discuss some of this at the last meeting. Members made comments about adding some potential meetings. You'll notice that none of these have dates confirmed in them as yet, and that's a process that the democracy officers, Janie and myself and the vice chair will, I'm sure, be consulted with. They'll always be on a Wednesday. As I pointed out, as long as they don't clash with any Liverpool games, I don't mind. But our colleagues satisfied with the additional prospective dates of a September meeting, which currently has no agenda items on it, and also a November meeting, which equally has no agenda items.
Sorry, Chair, just on that November meeting, I think there might just be a sort of a bit of a printing error because the final accounts will probably go to the November meeting.
So that should be in the agenda.
I think November, to be confirmed, should probably be after the key corporate risk monitor. So I think that the audit completion report, the final accounts and the Treasury mid-year review will probably be for the November meeting.
Okay, right, useful. Yeah, because October is looking a very, very hefty meeting, which Councillor Carr won't be at. So if everybody's happy with that, I mean, we did discuss it at quite some length. I think the only new stuff in there is the addition of those two prospective meetings. So as long as we're happy with that, that's the end of the agenda. I would just like to just make one short announcement. This will be the final meeting that Councillor Carr will be attending. The next meeting's in June, and he will have other fish to fry because he's about to be our new Lord Mayor. We wish you, we offer you our very great thanks for your participation on this committee, and wish you an incredibly successful year as York's first citizen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Something I'm looking forward to immensely, and thank you for your good wishes, and carry on the good work of audit and governance, all of you. Thank you.
And at annual council, well, I'm saying annual council, we will have a new member taking your esteemed place. How will that process work, Janie?
Because as usual, we'll be issuing the allocation of seats, and then it's for each political group to indicate who they wish to take up those seats.
Right. Does it have to go to a council meeting? Or?
Yes, it's annual council on the 26th of May.
Annual council, yeah, yeah. So for the June meeting, we should have a replacement.
Thank you, Chair.
That's it. 7:20. Good work. Thank you, everybody, and see you all